I'm Garrett, 32 years old, and I never thought my own sister would cut me out of her wedding. When Haley told me I wasn't invited because her fiancé Marcus didn't feel comfortable with me there, something broke inside me. So I booked a trip to Costa Rica, figured I'd treat myself while they celebrated. Then came the frantic calls, texts, voicemails. 27 missed calls in 3 hours. The wedding had imploded, and suddenly everyone needed me. Before I get into this mess, drop a comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Growing up, Haley and I were inseparable despite our 4-year age gap. I still remember her toddling after me in the backyard of our suburban Chicago home, determined to keep up with her big brother. Our bond was forged early. I was 8 when she was 4, and I appointed myself her official protector. Mom still has the crayon contract I wrote. Garrett promised to always keep Haley safe. I took that job seriously, especially when our parents' marriage started crumbling. Dad Richard and Mom Diane tried to hide their problems, but kids always know. The hushed arguments behind closed doors, the tense family dinners, the separate vacations. When I was 15 and Haley 11, they finally told us they were divorcing. I remember Haley crawling into my room that night, crying until she fell asleep on my floor. From then on, our sibling bond became even more important. During the messy divorce, I made sure Haley still got to soccer practice on time, helped with her homework, and tried to shield her from the worst of the adult drama. We created our own stability in the chaos. We built an elaborate fort in the backyard, half treehouse, half ground bunker that became our sanctuary. We called it Fort Hawkins, our last name, and spent entire weekends there with books, snacks, and our shared Nintendo DS. Fort Hawkins has 3 rules, I'd remind her. No parents, no problems, and no crying unless you're laughing too hard. Our love for the outdoors started there. We'd explore the forest preserve behind our neighborhood, hiking for hours and pretending we were wilderness explorers. I taught Haley how to identify poison ivy, build a basic lean-to, and navigate using the sun. Later, these adventures evolved into annual camping trips. Just the 2 of us. Even through college. Beyond our immediate family, Grandmother Eleanor was our rock. Mom's mother, she'd raised Diane alone after Grandpa died in Vietnam. A retired school teacher with endless patience, she lived just 20 minutes away and became our safe harbor during the divorce. Her small brick bungalow smelled like cinnamon and old books. And she never took sides in the family drama. Family is family, she'd say, even when they're being idiots. Uncle Philip, Dad's younger brother, also remained a constant. Unlike Dad, who buried himself in work after the divorce, Uncle Philip made sure to stay connected to both of us. A bachelor with no kids of his own, he became our fun uncle, the one who took us to rated movies and taught us to drive in empty parking lots before we had permits. Then there was Cousin Melanie, Aunt Beverly's daughter. Though technically, our second cousin, she and Haley, were born 3 weeks apart and grew up as best friends. Where Haley was studious and cautious, Melanie was bold and spontaneous. They balanced each other perfectly. It surprised no one when Haley later asked Melanie to be her maid of honor. Aunt Beverly, Mom's older sister, was the family drama queen. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. 3-time divorcee, Beverly considered herself an expert on relationships. "I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to," she'd announce at family gatherings, cocktail in hand. As for me, I found my path after college, landing at an architectural firm in Chicago. I loved creating spaces that brought people together, perhaps compensating for our fractured family home. By 32, I'd worked my way up to senior designer, specializing in sustainable commercial buildings. My career was thriving, even if my personal life had hit some bumps. My relationship with Amanda ended a year before all this wedding drama began. After 3 years together, we realized we wanted different futures. She was eager for marriage and suburbs, while I still felt drawn to city life and wasn't ready to settle. The breakup was amicable, but left me questioning what I really wanted. I channeled that energy into renovating my loft apartment in a converted factory building. Each weekend was dedicated to tearing out walls, sanding floors, or installing reclaimed wood shelving. The physical labor provided therapy my mind needed. My hands would be raw and muscles aching, but the transformation gave me purpose. My support system during this time came from 3 close friends. Travis, my college roommate, who now worked as a financial consultant. Dominic, a chef I'd met while designing his restaurant, and Jordan, a photographer who lived in my building. These guys kept me grounded when family drama threatened to pull me under. Around this time, I started noticing subtle changes in my relationship with Haley. After graduate school, she'd moved to Indianapolis for a museum curator position, not far, but enough to change our dynamic. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. She'd miss our annual camping trip for the first time, citing work obligations. I tried arranging visits, but schedules never aligned. The Christmas gathering at grandmother Eleanor's house 2 years ago was when I first felt something was truly different. Haley seemed distant, constantly checking her phone and disappearing for calls. When I asked if everything was okay, she brushed me off with a quick "just work stuff." But I knew my sister something had shifted. I made several attempts to rebuild our connection over the following months. I sent care packages to her Indianapolis apartment, planned a surprise visit with tickets to an exhibit she'd mentioned wanting to see, and even started a shared digital photo album of our childhood adventures. Her responses were appreciative but brief. The Haley who once called me at 2 a.m. to analyze her dreams or debate the best cereal milk was fading away. Little did I know this growing distance was just the beginning of what would become the most painful and ultimately enlightening chapter in our relationship. I'll never forget the day Haley called to tell me about Marcus. Her voice had a breathless quality I hadn't heard since her college acceptance letter arrived. "I met someone, Gar," she said. "He's incredible." According to Haley, they'd met at a dinner party hosted by a museum board member. Marcus Henderson, 34 financial portfolio manager, from a prominent Indianapolis family Yale graduate. Their connection was immediate and intense, she said. Within 3 weeks, they were officially dating. I was happy for her, but unsettled by the speed. Haley had always been cautious in relationships, taking months to define anything as official. This whirlwind romance seemed out of character. When we spoke over the next few weeks, every conversation circled back to Marcus. How Marcus surprised her with front-row symphony tickets. How Marcus knew the chef at the exclusive restaurant downtown. How Marcus thought she should consider a position at the private gallery his family supported instead of the underfunded public museum. Red flags were waving, but I told myself I was being overprotective. Then came the subtle personality shifts. My vegetarian sister suddenly wasn't strict about it anymore because Marcus came from a big steak family. My jeans and sweater sister started sending me pictures asking if outfits were appropriate for dinner with Marcus's colleagues. My independent sister began prefacing opinions with Marcus thinks. 2 months into their relationship, Haley invited me to Indianapolis to meet him. I drove the 3 hours from Chicago, rehearsing how to be supportive while reserving judgment. The restaurant Marcus chose screamed old money, dim lighting, leather booths, waiters in bow ties. He stood when I approached, extending his hand with practiced charm. Impeccably dressed in what I assumed was a tailored suit, he looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury watch advertisement. Garrett, finally. Haley talks about her big brother constantly. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which were already assessing everything from my non-designer watch to my casual button-down. Throughout dinner, Marcus steered conversation toward topics where he could showcase his knowledge: fine wines, European politics, investment strategies. When I mentioned my sustainable architecture projects, he nodded politely before changing the subject. "Architecture is such an interesting hobby," he said, though I'd clearly explained it was my career. I noticed how he ordered for Haley without asking what she wanted. How she looked at him before answering any question I directed at her. How he subtly checked out our waitress when Haley excused herself to the restroom. The most revealing moment came during a conversation about family holidays. "The Hawkins family sounds charmingly informal," Marcus commented after I described our traditional Thanksgiving touch football game in the Henderson household. "Holidays are more structured affairs, proper attire, assigned seating. My father believes traditions instill values." The implication was clear: my family's ways were inferior to his. Haley jumped in. "Marcus's family traditions are beautiful. I'm learning so much from them." The sister who once mocked country club culture was now embracing it. The disconnect was jarring. Over the next few months, Marcus's influence over Haley became increasingly apparent. She began questioning her career path, eventually leaving her museum position for a role at the private gallery connected to the Henderson family, a job that came with less autonomy but more prestige. Family gatherings were repeatedly missed because Marcus had important work events that Haley needed to attend. When she did visit, conversations were guarded as if she was measuring her words. Mom called me concerned after Haley mentioned combining bank accounts with Marcus despite dating for only 5 months. Uncle Philip reported an uncomfortable encounter where Marcus had spoken condescendingly to Haley in public. Grandmother Eleanor, never one to meddle, pulled me aside after meeting Marcus to say, "That young man reminds me of your grandfather. Not in the good ways." The breaking point came when Melanie called me in tears. She'd been out with Haley and Marcus when he'd taken control of Haley's phone, responding to texts on her behalf and declining an invitation from her old museum colleagues, claiming we have standards about where we spend our time. I could no longer stay silent. I invited Haley for a weekend in Chicago, making sure Marcus had a work commitment that would prevent him from joining. Over lunch at our favorite diner, I gently raised my concerns. "Hales, you know I just want you to be happy," I started. "But things seem to be moving really fast with Marcus, and I'm noticing some changes in you that worry me." Her defenses rose immediately. "You don't even know him, Garrett. You've met him once and decided he's not good enough. This isn't about good enough. It's about how you seem different around him. Less you." The conversation quickly deteriorated. Haley accused me of being jealous of her relationship, of never giving Marcus a chance, of trying to keep her from growing up. When I mentioned specific concerns, the career change, the controlling behaviors, she dismissed each one with rehearsed explanations that sounded like they'd originated from Marcus himself. "You've never understood what it means to move in certain circles," she said, a phrase I'd never heard from my sister before. "Marcus is helping me reach my potential." We parted on tense terms, with Haley cutting her visit short. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown Indianapolis number. It was Marcus. "I thought we should clear the air man to man," he said, voice smooth as polished marble. "Haley values your relationship, and I'd hate to see misunderstandings come between siblings." What followed was a masterclass in subtle manipulation. He expressed understanding of my protective instincts while suggesting they were misplaced. He invited me to reach out directly to him in the future, rather than upsetting Haley. The conversation ended with what felt like a veiled threat. Family dynamics can be complicated. I'd hate for Haley to feel forced to choose between her past and her future. After that call, I reluctantly backed off. The distance between Haley and me grew wider, but I hoped she'd eventually see Marcus for who he was, without me pushing. I couldn't have predicted how dramatically that realization would come. The engagement announcement came via group text on a Tuesday morning, just 8 months after they'd met. A photo of Haley's hand sporting a diamond that looked heavy enough to require its own zip code, with the caption, "She said yes, wedding planning begins." My stomach dropped. I called Mom immediately. "Did you know this was happening?" I asked. "Not until this morning," she sighed. "Richard got a courtesy call from Marcus yesterday. Apparently asking for a father's blessing is tradition in the Henderson family." The sarcasm in her voice was evident. Dad hadn't been involved in Haley's major life decisions since the divorce. The family reactions were mixed. Dad seemed flattered by the traditional gesture. Mom voiced cautious support while privately texting me her concerns. Aunt Beverly immediately launched into wedding planning mode, seeing an opportunity to network with the Henderson social circle. Uncle Philip called me, simply saying, "This feels rushed, doesn't it?" It was Grandmother Eleanor who addressed the elephant in the room. When I visited her that weekend, she served tea in her garden and got straight to the point. "That boy is marrying our Haley for what she represents, not who she is," she said, pinching a dead leaf from her begonia. "I've seen his type before. They want a pretty accomplished wife who can be molded. The question is whether Haley will realize it before or after the wedding." The engagement party at the Henderson estate confirmed many of our concerns. The sprawling mansion on Indianapolis's north side screamed old money, with manicured gardens and staff circulating among guests. Haley looked beautiful but unfamiliar in a designer dress, her hair styled in a way I'd never seen before. I felt immediately out of place among Marcus's friends, investment bankers, corporate lawyers, and old boarding school buddies who conversed in a shorthand of inside jokes and shared references. When I mentioned being an architect, they asked if I'd worked on any buildings they might recognize losing interest when my projects didn't include luxury condos or private clubs. "Your sister is quite the find," one of Marcus's friends told me by the bar, his words slightly slurred. Marcus always had an eye for diamonds in the rough. The wedding planning consumed everything over the next few months. What had started as a reasonable 9-month engagement timeline quickly evolved into an exercise in excess. The venue changed from a charming historical building to an exclusive country club. The guest list ballooned from 150 to 300, then 400 people, most from Marcus's side. With each change, Haley's natural taste was overridden by the preferences of Marcus and his mother Charlotte, a formidable woman who approached wedding planning like a military campaign. The modest, meaningful ceremony Haley had once described wanting was buried under layers of extravagance. "It's the Henderson name on display," I overheard Charlotte telling Haley during a venue visit. "The wedding reflects on the family, dear." I tried staying involved, offering to help with the wedding website and suggesting I could take engagement photos to save costs. Each offer was politely declined. "Marcus has connections" became the refrain. His college roommate's cousin was a premier wedding photographer. His family's company had an in-house web design team. My contributions weren't needed. Family tensions escalated when Charlotte Henderson and my mother clashed over rehearsal dinner plans. Mom, who'd been saving for years to contribute to Haley's wedding, found her ideas dismissed as quaint by Charlotte. The group chat dedicated to wedding planning became a battlefield of passive-aggressive comments. Things took a concerning turn during the bachelor and bachelorette parties. I wasn't invited to Marcus's bachelor weekend in Vegas, which seemed odd considering I was Haley's only brother. Even stranger Marcus had invited my friend Travis, who he'd met once through a work connection. When Travis returned, he seemed uncomfortable discussing the weekend. Over beers at my place, he finally admitted what bothered him. "Look, I'm not a prude, but Marcus was out of control," Travis confided. "He was all over the club waitresses, telling everyone he was enjoying his last days of freedom. He even disappeared with one of them for almost an hour." Travis showed me a group photo where Marcus had his arm around a woman who wasn't Haley, his hand inappropriately placed. "I didn't know whether to tell you, but as Haley's brother, I thought you should know." Meanwhile, Haley returned from her bachelorette weekend in Miami, subdued and withdrawn. When I called to hear about the trip, her answers were vague and rushed. Later that week, cousin Melanie called me, clearly upset. "I don't know what to do with what I saw," she began hesitantly. "We were at this restaurant in Miami and I went to use the restroom. Through the patio doors, I saw Marcus with a woman at the bar across the street. They were intimate, kissing." "Wait, Marcus was in Miami during Haley's bachelorette party?" I asked, confused. "He claimed he was in the area for work and surprised Haley the final night." She seemed uncomfortable, but played along. When I asked her about it later, she said I must have been mistaken about what I saw. Melanie was torn between loyalty to Haley and concern about what was happening. I thanked her for telling me, but wasn't sure how to proceed. Confronting Haley with secondhand information would likely backfire, pushing her further away when she might soon need support. I had no idea just how soon that moment would come. The call came on a rainy Thursday evening as I was finishing dinner. Haley's name on my screen gave me a moment of hope that she was reaching out to reconnect. "Hey, Hales. How's the wedding planning going?" There was an uncomfortable pause before she spoke. "That's actually why I'm calling Garrett. There's been some adjustments to the wedding party and guest list." Her voice had that careful quality people use when delivering bad news. She explained that venue capacity issues had forced them to streamline the guest list, that Marcus's family had important business associates who needed to be included, meaning cuts had to come from elsewhere. "Are you saying I'm not in the wedding party anymore?" I asked, still not grasping the full implication. Another pause. "Garrett, I'm so sorry, but you're not going to be invited to the wedding at all." The words hit like a physical blow. Not invited to my only sister's wedding. "This doesn't make sense, Haley. I'm your brother." She stumbled through more excuses, venue size, budget constraints, family politics, none of which explained excluding her only sibling, finally pressed for the real reason. She broke. Marcus doesn't feel comfortable with you there, okay? He thinks you've been negative about our relationship from the beginning. He says your energy would impact our special day. My energy. As if I were some mystical force rather than her brother who'd seen her through every major life event since she was born. And you're okay with that? I asked, my voice barely controlled. You're choosing his comfort over having your brother at your wedding. You don't understand the position I'm in. She whispered. His family is making this wedding happen. If I push back on this one thing, Haley, this is your brother, not some distant cousin or work acquaintance. The conversation deteriorated from there. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. I accused her of becoming someone I didn't recognize. She claimed I was jealous and trying to sabotage her happiness. When I brought up the concerning behaviors I'd witnessed, she exploded. This is exactly why you're not invited. You've never given him a chance. You've judged him from day one. The call ended with Haley in tears and me sitting in stunned silence in my darkened apartment. The emotional aftermath was brutal. I cycled through disbelief, anger, and deep hurt. I left voicemails for Haley that went unanswered. Family members began taking sides. Most were shocked at my exclusion, but a few suggested I should be the bigger person and accept Haley's decision. Mom was caught in the middle, devastated by the rift, but unwilling to jeopardize her attendance at her daughter's wedding by protesting too strongly. Dad surprisingly called to say he thought the whole thing was ridiculous, and had told Haley as much, though it hadn't changed her mind. Grandmother Eleanor invited me over for tea, her way of providing comfort in crisis. In her sunny kitchen, she placed her weathered hand over mine. Sometimes people have to take a wrong turn to realize they've left the path, she said gently. Haley is lost right now, but that doesn't mean she's gone forever. Uncle Philip was more direct. Give her space to realize her mistake, he advised. The harder you push right now, the deeper she'll dig in. Marcus has her convinced you're the enemy. Don't prove him right. The advice made sense, but the hurt remained. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself browsing travel sites. If I wasn't going to be at the wedding, why stay in town and marinate in rejection? Maybe some distance would be good for everyone. Costa Rica appeared in my search results, a place Haley and I had always talked about visiting together someday. The rainforests, beaches, wildlife. We'd planned this theoretical trip since we were teenagers. There was a poetic justice in going there now alone. I found an eco-resort nestled between jungle and ocean, offering private bungalows and digital detox packages. The price made me wince, but I had been saving for a new kitchen renovation and for a substantial wedding gift for Haley. Those funds were now available. With a surge of decisive energy, I booked 2 weeks at the resort coinciding with Haley's wedding date. I added excursion packages, ziplining waterfall hikes, surfing lessons. If I was going to miss my sister's wedding, I might as well be having the experience of a lifetime. When I mentioned the trip to Jordan, he immediately asked if he could join for the middle portion. You shouldn't be alone the whole time, especially during the actual wedding day, he said. Having a friend there for part of the trip felt right enough solo time for reflection, but support during what would likely be the hardest days. I announced my travel plans to the family with forced casualness. Since I won't be attending the wedding, I've decided to take that Costa Rica trip I've been putting off. The reactions were mixed. Mom worried it would look like a deliberate statement. It was. Dad thought it was a healthy choice to remove yourself from the drama, also true. Aunt Beverly called it passive-aggressive, not entirely wrong. Grandmother Eleanor simply nodded and gave me an old family watch that had belonged to her father. For your travels, she said. Sometimes we need to carry a piece of where we're from to figure out where we're going. A week before my departure, Haley made a half-hearted attempt to reconnect. A text, I hope you understand this isn't personal. I still want you in my life. I replied that excluding someone from a major life event seemed definitionally personal, but that I wished her happiness. The exchange went nowhere. The final twist came 3 days before my flight. Mom called to tell me the wedding date had been moved up by 2 weeks due to a scheduling conflict with the venue. This meant the ceremony would now take place during my non-refundable Costa Rica trip. Did Haley know about my trip dates when they rescheduled? I asked. Mom's silence was answer enough. I considered changing my travel plans, but ultimately decided against it. The new wedding date felt like a final message from Haley and Marcus. My absence was not just accepted, but preferred. Fine. Costa Rica was calling, and for once I'd choose myself over family drama. What I couldn't have anticipated was how completely the tables would turn while I was gone. The moment I stepped off the plane in San Jose, the humid tropical air felt like freedom. After a scenic drive through mountains and jungle, I arrived at the eco-resort as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. My private bungalow, perched on a hillside overlooking the Pacific, was the perfect balance of luxury and natural simplicity. The polished wooden floors, a hammock on the porch, and a shower partially open to the jungle. The resort manager, a cheerful woman named Lucia, explained the property's sustainability practices and digital detox philosophy. While Wi-Fi was available in the main lodge, the bungalows were intentionally disconnected. My phone would stay charged in my room, but I'd only check it during visits to the main area. Most guests find they don't miss their devices after the first day, Lucia promised. The jungle has better entertainment. She wasn't wrong. My first morning I woke to howler monkeys announcing the dawn and hummingbirds darting around the flowering plants outside my window. After a breakfast of fresh tropical fruits and local coffee, I joined a small group for a waterfall hike. Our guide Diego was a local who'd grown up in the nearby village. With encyclopedic knowledge of the rainforest and infectious enthusiasm, he transformed a challenging hike into a journey of discovery. Under his guidance, we spotted toucans, poison dart frogs, and a sloth moving with glacial slowness along a branch. The series of waterfalls, each more spectacular than the last, culminated in a 50-foot cascade emptying into a crystal-clear pool. While others immediately jumped in, I stood mesmerized by the raw power and beauty. It struck me that this was the first time in months I hadn't been thinking about Haley, Marcus, or the wedding. Over the next few days, I embraced new experiences with abandon. Surfing lessons left me battered but exhilarated. A cooking class taught me to prepare traditional Costa Rican dishes. Evenings were spent in the open-air restaurant sharing stories with other travelers. The British couple celebrating their 30th anniversary. The solo traveler from Australia on a 6-month journey. The retired professors, documenting bird species. I began noticing subtle shifts in my perspective. Conversations with Diego during a private birding walk touched on family and forgiveness. In our culture, family is everything, he explained as we paused to watch scarlet macaws. But that doesn't mean family relationships are always easy. Sometimes the ones we love most can hurt us deepest. When I shared a simplified version of my situation, Diego nodded thoughtfully. The jungle teaches us about resilience. See that tree? He pointed to a massive ceiba with roots sprawling across the forest floor. It drops its leaves in dry season, appears dead to survive. Sometimes we must do the same, let go temporarily to preserve what matters most. These conversations, along with daily meditation sessions at sunrise, began reconstructing my understanding of the situation. I realized I'd been so focused on being right, on protecting Haley, that I'd failed to respect her agency, however misguided her choices seemed. On my 5th day, I participated in a traditional jungle meditation experience led by a local healer. Seated in a clearing as twilight descended, surrounded by the symphony of nighttime jungle sounds, I experienced a profound moment of clarity. The hurt remained, but the anger dissipated. I couldn't control Haley's choices, only my response to them. That evening, I began writing letters to Haley that I had no intention of sending, honest expressions of my feelings, memories of our childhood, and hopes for her future happiness, even if her path diverged from what I'd envisioned. Jordan arrived on day 7, bringing welcome energy and an outside perspective. After settling into his bungalow, we hiked to a secluded beach, where he listened to my evolving thoughts about the situation. "You know what strikes me," he said as we watched the sunset. "Your entire life you've been Haley's protector. Maybe this forced separation is allowing both of you to establish your identities apart from that dynamic." His observation resonated deeply. Perhaps my role as protective big brother had become so ingrained that neither of us knew how to relate differently as adults. The first hint that something had gone wrong back home came the following afternoon. Returning from a zipline adventure, Jordan checked his phone in the main lodge and found a cryptic text from Travis Major's situation with H's wedding. Call when you can. Before he could get details, we left for a night hike, phones remaining in our rooms. The next morning, a resort staff member mentioned that there had been several calls to my bungalow. Very persistent, she noted. International calls from the United States. My first thought was that something had happened to grandmother Eleanor or another family member. After breakfast, I retrieved my phone, which had been off for days. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications, 27 missed calls, 42 text messages, 13 voicemails. With growing alarm, I began scrolling through the texts. They painted a chaotic picture. Mom, call me ASAP. Emergency with the wedding. Melanie, OMG. Garrett, you were right about Marcus. Complete disaster. Uncle Philip, where are you? Family needs you. Wedding off. Dad, son, your sister needs you. How quickly can you get back? The voicemails filled in the devastating details. 2 days before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, one of the bridesmaids, Marcus's cousin's wife Sophia, had become noticeably intoxicated and emotional. In front of the entire wedding party, she'd confessed that she and Marcus had been having an affair for months. She had texts and photos to prove it. Worse, she revealed that Marcus had similar arrangements with at least 2 other women. He'd been leading multiple lives while pressuring Haley toward marriage. The scene had apparently devolved into chaos. Marcus denied everything, then tried to claim Sophia was mentally unstable. When confronted with the evidence on her phone, he'd stormed out, leaving Haley devastated in front of both families. The final voicemail from grandmother Eleanor was the most affecting. Garrett, dear. I know you're finding peace where you are, and part of me hesitates to pull you back into this storm. But your sister is shattered. She's been asking for you. Come home when you can, but know that we're all with her until you arrive. Jordan and I sat in stunned silence after listening to the messages. The wedding had not just been postponed, it had imploded, spectacularly exposing Marcus as the fraud I'd suspected all along. What are you going to do? Jordan finally asked. It was a fair question. Part of me, the hurt, rejected part, wanted to stay right where I was. Let Haley handle the fallout without me. Wasn't that what she'd wanted? Independence from her overprotective brother? But the larger part of me, the part that had signed that crayon contract decades ago, already knew the answer. I need to go back. I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. Not to say I told you so, but because that's my sister. Whatever happened between us, she needs her family now. The logistical challenges were significant. Changing flights during peak tourist season, arranging transportation back to San Jose, explaining the situation to the resort staff who had planned the remainder of my excursions. Jordan decided to stay and enjoy the rest of his planned time, which meant facing the situation alone. As I packed my bags, I found grandmother Eleanor's watch. The face was weathered, but the mechanism still kept perfect time. Family. Complicated, messy, sometimes heartbreaking, but mine. I was going home. The journey back felt interminable. A delayed flight from San Jose to Miami. A missed connection requiring an overnight airport stay. Spotty Wi-Fi that made communication with family frustrating and incomplete. By the time I finally boarded my flight to Indianapolis, I'd been traveling for nearly 30 hours, running on airport coffee and anxiety. Through brief text exchanges, I'd learned that Haley was staying at grandmother Eleanor's house, refusing to return to the apartment she'd shared with Marcus. The wedding vendors had been notified, though most deposits were non-refundable. Marcus's family was attempting damage control with rumors that they were offering financial settlements to keep the scandal quiet. What worried me most were the descriptions of Haley's state. Completely shut down, Mom had texted. Barely eating or speaking, according to Melanie. I prepared myself for the worst as the plane touched down in Indianapolis. Uncle Philip was waiting at the arrivals gate, his usually jovial face solemn. We embraced briefly before he led me to his car, filling in details during the drive. "It's worse than just the affair," he explained. "Turns out Marcus has a gambling problem. He's been using Haley's savings to cover debts, and there's talk that the real reason they rushed the wedding was pressure from his parents. They thought marriage might settle him down." The picture of calculated manipulation became clearer with each revelation. Marcus had isolated Haley from her support system, especially me, knowing his deceptions wouldn't withstand close scrutiny. "The Henderson family is in full crisis management mode," Uncle Philip continued. "Their lawyer contacted Mom yesterday suggesting a mutual non-disclosure agreement, as if this were a business merger gone wrong instead of their son destroying someone's life." The financial fallout was substantial. Non-refundable deposits for the venue, catering, flowers, and more totaled nearly $30,000. Haley had already paid her portion money she wouldn't see again. Wedding gifts were being returned, airline tickets canceled, honeymoon reservations forfeited. And the media attention I asked, remembering the Henderson family's prominence in Indianapolis. Local society pages are having a field day. Nothing major, but enough that Haley can't go anywhere without feeling like people are whispering. We arrived at Grandmother Eleanor's modest bungalow as evening fell. Mom met us at the door, embracing me with relief. "She's in the sunroom," she whispered. "She knows you're coming." I found Haley curled on the wicker sofa where we'd spent countless childhood afternoons, reading books and playing board games. She looked small, diminished somehow, still wearing what appeared to be pajamas at 6 p.m. When she looked up, the raw emotion in her eyes nearly broke me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of recent months hanging between us. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse. "You were right. About everything." I crossed the room and sat beside her. "I didn't want to be right, Hales. I didn't even know who I was anymore," she whispered. "It happened so gradually. Each small compromise seemed reasonable at the time. Then one day I was planning a wedding I didn't want to, a man I didn't really know wearing clothes that didn't feel like mine. The initial awkwardness dissolved as we began talking, really talking for the first time in over a year. Haley described how Marcus had systematically isolated her, criticizing her family, friends, and career choices until she began to doubt her own judgment. How he'd love-bombed her with extravagant gestures while simultaneously undermining her confidence. How he'd framed his controlling behavior as caring and traditional values. The worst part, she admitted, was pushing you away. "He convinced me you were trying to control me, that your concerns came from jealousy or an inability to see me as an adult. The more you tried to warn me, the more he used it to prove his point." I listened without interruption, understanding that she needed to process these realizations aloud. When she finally fell silent, I chose my words carefully. "You know what I was doing when everything fell apart?" I asked. "I was sitting on a beach in Costa Rica writing you letters I never planned to send. Letters about our childhood, our bond, my hopes for your happiness. Even when I was hurt and angry, I never stopped loving you, Haley." Her tears came, then deep, healing sobs that seemed to release months of pent-up emotion. I held her as she cried, feeling my own eyes well up. "I'm so ashamed," she managed between sobs. "How could I have been so blind? Marcus was manipulative and calculating. That's not your fault. But I chose him over my own brother. And I'll still be here every time you need me. That's what family means." Our conversation continued late into the night, moving from the painful recent past to tentative plans for recovery. Haley would need to find a new apartment, possibly a new job, since the gallery position was connected to the Henderson family. She'd need to rebuild friendships that had withered under Marcus's influence. "One step at a time," I assured her. "You're not doing any of this alone." The confrontation with Marcus came unexpectedly the following day. Haley had asked me to accompany her to the apartment to collect her remaining belongings, assuming Marcus would be at work. Instead, we found him packing up his own things, apparently planning to move back to his parents' estate until the scandal blew over. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to calculated charm. "Garrett, back from your travels. Perfect timing to help your sister during this unfortunate misunderstanding." His audacity was breathtaking. Even now, he was attempting to manipulate the narrative to minimize his betrayal as a mere misunderstanding. Let's be clear, I said, keeping my voice level. There's no misunderstanding. You systematically lied to and manipulated my sister while cheating on her with multiple women. The only unfortunate thing is that she didn't see through you sooner. Marcus's facade cracked slightly. You always thought you knew what was best for Haley. Never gave me a fair chance. I wonder how much you influenced her decision to call off the wedding. Haley, who had been quietly gathering her belongings, stepped forward. I called it off because you're a liar and a cheat, Marcus. My brother had nothing to do with it. You made sure of that by excluding him from our lives. Marcus's expression hardened. You know, this emotional reaction is exactly why I had concerns about your family's influence. The Hendersons handle private matters privately. Your family turns everything into a soap opera. The calculated cruelty of his words, the attempt to gaslight Haley even now, sparked a protective rage in me. I stepped closer to him, not quite invading his space, but making my physical presence felt. Let me explain something, Marcus. The only reason we're having this conversation, instead of something much less pleasant, is because causing you physical harm would only create problems for Haley. But understand this. You are never to contact my sister again. Not to explain. Not to apologize. Not to clear the air. Any communication goes through her lawyer. He attempted to maintain his superior smirk, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, weighing whether his family's influence would protect him if things escalated. Something in my expression must have conveyed the depth of my resolve, because he ultimately stepped back. Take what you want, Haley, he said dismissively. The Henderson family is prepared to be generous in putting this unfortunate episode behind us. Haley's voice was steady as she replied. The only thing I want from your family is distance, Marcus. You can keep your generosity and your lies. We finished gathering her essential belongings in tense silence. As we were leaving, Marcus called after us. You know you two deserve each other. Same provincial mindset, same emotional weakness. Good luck in your little family bubble. I placed a steadying hand on Haley's shoulder and guided her out without responding. His words meant nothing now. The truth had been revealed, and no amount of Henderson family spin could change it. In the car, Haley let out a shaky breath. Thank you for being there. I don't think I could have faced him alone. You're stronger than you realize, I told her. But you never have to face anything alone again. That's a promise. As we drove away from the life she'd almost committed to, I could feel something shifting between us, a return to the solid foundation we'd always shared, but with a new understanding of its value. We'd both learned costly lessons about the importance of honesty, boundaries, and trusting our instincts. Now came the hard work of rebuilding. The weeks following the wedding implosion brought their own challenges. While the initial shock subsided, the practical and emotional aftermath required daily navigation. The family rallied around Haley with a unified support system that surprised even me. Mom took charge of dealing with wedding vendors, negotiating partial refunds where possible, and handling the return of gifts. Dad, usually awkward in emotional situations, showed up consistently with practical help, changing locks on Haley's new apartment, moving furniture, handling paperwork. Aunt Beverly, who thrived on drama, channeled her energy into countering gossip in local social circles. Nobody messes with a Hawkins and gets away with clean reputation, she declared, armed with her extensive network of friends in Indianapolis society. Uncle Philip offered his lake cabin as a weekend retreat whenever the city felt too suffocating. Cousin Melanie organized a redemption party with Haley's old friends, many of whom had been pushed aside during her relationship with Marcus. Grandmother Eleanor provided the stable, loving environment Haley needed most. Her home became command central for Operation Rebuild, as we jokingly called it. Her wisdom offered perspective that no one else could provide. You know, she told Haley one evening as we sat on her porch when I was 27, I nearly married a man who seemed perfect on paper. Your grandfather came along and wrecked all those sensible plans. Best derailment of my life. Sometimes what feels like humiliation is actually liberation in disguise. Haley stayed with me for the first month after everything fell apart. My loft apartment, still mid-renovation, became our shared healing space. Late-night conversations helped process the layers of betrayal and self-doubt Marcus had created. I keep asking myself how I didn't see it, Haley confessed one night as we sat among paint cans and dropped cloths. There were so many red flags. Manipulation works because it's gradual, I reminded her. The Marcus you met at the beginning wasn't the same person he became, or rather he hid that person until you were too invested to easily walk away. I think I was also running from something, she admitted. Being a curator was harder than I expected. Dating was disappointing. It was easier to slide into Marcus's ready-made world than keep fighting to build my own. These insights marked important steps in her recovery. Rather than seeing herself solely as a victim, Haley began recognizing the vulnerabilities Marcus had exploited and the choices she'd made that allowed his influence to grow. Meanwhile, I was processing my own realizations about family dynamics. My protective instincts, while well-intentioned, had sometimes crossed into controlling territory. I hadn't always given Haley room to make her own mistakes and discoveries. "We need a new sibling operating agreement," I suggested one morning over coffee. "Less protection, more partnership." Haley smiled, a genuine smile that had become more frequent lately. "I'd like that. Being saved is nice, but being respected is better." The idea of returning to Costa Rica together emerged naturally from our healing conversations. The trip I'd taken alone could be reimagined as a shared experience. We began planning a visit for the following spring, not to erase what had happened, but to create new memories alongside the difficult ones. Jordan, who'd completed his portion of the Costa Rica trip, became an unexpected source of support for Haley. His perspective as someone who hadn't witnessed the entire Marcus saga provided valuable objectivity. They developed a friendship independent of me, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss photography, a hobby Haley was rediscovering after Marcus had dismissed it as amateurish. Professional recovery came alongside emotional healing. After careful consideration, Haley decided to leave the gallery position connected to the Henderson family. Through Uncle Philip's connections, she secured an interview at a regional museum consortium, eventually landing a role that combined her curatorial skills with educational outreach, a direction she'd wanted to explore before Marcus steered her toward more prestigious but less fulfilling work. The process of returning wedding gifts proved unexpectedly therapeutic. Each package represented someone who had cared enough to celebrate Haley's happiness. Returning these items could have been humiliating, but Haley transformed it by including personal notes, explaining the situation with dignity and gratitude. "I'm not ashamed anymore," she told me after sending the last package. "Embarrassed sometimes, sure. But shame implies I did something wrong by trusting someone I loved. The wrongdoing was all his." This shift in perspective marked a crucial milestone in her healing. She was reclaiming her narrative, refusing to be defined by Marcus's betrayal. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't our family gathered at grandmother Eleanor's house for Thanksgiving, Haley arrived with homemade cranberry sauce and a quiet confidence that hadn't been present in years. She had moved into a small but charming apartment, restored friendships that had withered under Marcus's influence, and recently earned a promotion at the museum consortium. I had changes to share as well. The Costa Rica experience had shifted something fundamental in my approach to life. The renovation on my apartment was finally complete, but more importantly, I'd begun dating someone, Claire, an environmental engineer I'd met through a professional networking event. Unlike past relationships, this one moved at a deliberate pace with open communication and mutual respect as foundations. When Claire joined us for dessert, Haley pulled me aside. "She's lovely," she whispered. "And I notice how she listens when you talk. How you listen when she talks." That's what I missed with Marcus, that genuine exchange. The holiday gathering culminated with grandmother Eleanor's announcement that for her 80th birthday she wanted a family trip, all expenses paid from her don't need it anymore. Fund, as she called it. The destination, Costa Rica. "I want to see this place that helped heal my grandchildren," she declared. "And I'm not getting any younger, so no arguments." That evening, as family dispersed and Haley prepared to drive back to her apartment, we shared a quiet moment on grandmother Eleanor's porch swing. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" Haley asked. "How being excluded from my wedding led you to Costa Rica, which led to your personal growth." which helped you be exactly what I needed when everything fell apart. Life has a strange way of working out, I agreed. Sometimes being uninvited from where you thought you should be puts you exactly where you need to be, she mused. I wasn't ready to hear your concerns before the disaster. Maybe we both needed that time apart to find our way back to being brother and sister on new terms. Her insight resonated deeply. The exclusion that had hurt so badly had created space for necessary growth on both sides. The painful separation had ultimately strengthened our connection. As stars appeared in the November sky, I thought about the journey we'd traveled, not just the physical distance to Costa Rica and back, but the emotional terrain we'd navigated. The path forward wasn't perfect or without challenges, but it was authentic. We were building relationships with each other, with ourselves, with others, based on truth rather than expectations or obligations. Sometimes the deepest family bonds are forged, not despite difficult journeys, but because of them. Sometimes being excluded from one door means finding the courage to open a better one. Have you ever experienced a situation where being left out ultimately led to something better? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family resilience and finding your way through life's unexpected turns. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the family that matters most is the one that shows up when everything falls apart.